Africans at home and throughout the diaspora. Unity is strength. We got the power.
Stop the fussing and the fighting. Now's the time to do the right thing.
We need more unity. Come.
Stop the fussing and the fighting. Now's the time to do the right thing.
In the spirit of Umoja, embrace with love.
Let's do it.
Yes, this is Jamala Rogers, your host of Voices from the Battlefield, and we have a special guest today that's what I saw called calling from behind the walls, and so we'll get to him in a minute. But this is a time when I remind you that we are connecting the voices on the battlefield, whether they be in the prison industrial complex, around healthcare, around education. But what you will see is that these issues are connected. Sometimes the folks who are on the battlefield feel isolated, but then you get to see that people are fighting the same battles in different parts of the country, but also different parts of the world. So I always like to bring that into focus so that we don't feel isolated and we see how powerful we really are. So I also like to remind you that this is a time when to be reminded that we still have a pathological liar in the White House, a 34 count felon, a twice impeached president, who now, as far as I'm concerned, and many other folks, is not only a national threat, but he is an international threat. And so we still have genocide in Gaza. We still don't have justice for the uh, victims of Jeffrey Epstein, and we are still on the verge of being complicit in the war against Iran. And so all of that to say that this is all being done in our name with our money. And I want to say that because hopefully that enrages you that all of this is happening, including the destruction of the White House lawn and building and all of that that goes with it, all in our name, all in our name. So trillions of dollars are going out the window to do these vanity projects for Trump and to make his family richer, and to the detriment of working class people. So there you have it. So we're going to talk about some of the ways you can get involved. People are resisting, they're organizing, and that's all good. Uh, Today we have a particular case, and we've done cases of injustice with the prison industrial complex, but there's always one that I think needs a little more spotlight, and it is the case of James Scott. And so we have today two people who have been advocates of his case. We have Khanika Harper, who's with an organization, and we'll hear about her. And we also have Adam. I thought we had Adam. Adam disappeared, but we're going to get Adam back. And do we still have James? Because I'm fearful if we don't have Adam, we don't have James. So, Adam, are you still there? Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Okay. So what we're going to do, we're going to keep this show going, and we're going to hear from Khanika Harper, who's with an organization, Missouri for All. And so, Khanika, talk a little bit about your organization, and then specifically how you came across James Scott's case.
Thank you, Jamala. Yes, I'm Khanika Harper with Justice for All. We are a Missouri-based organization that helps individuals and their families in various ways who are unjustly done by our criminal justice system. James came across our desk a few years ago via other incarcerated individuals, just honestly spreading the light on his case because of the injustice that he has received from Missouri. And then a colleague linked up with the videographer who's doing a a documentary on James. They've done one once before, and I believe they're doing one at this current moment. And that's how we came about meeting Adam. And Adam has been along this journey with James for 30 years now. Can you hear
Mm.
me? Okay, yeah.
Yes, I can.
Okay. Yeah, Adam has been on this journey with James for 30 years. So these injustices, they look differently, but they act the same.
And I would say also that the same elements are usually involved where you have prosecutorial misconduct, you have inadequate defense attorney, you have, police informants or jail informants. So those elements seem to be common themes throughout wrongful convictions. And so those need to be lifted up because oftentimes people wonder, well, how did these people get to this place? And it's a whole system and systems that are up against it, which makes it extremely difficult to come out of there. Because I can tell you, the James Scotts, the Ellen Reasonovers, the Daryl Burtons, they got out, but there are many, many still languishing inside not just Missouri prisons, but all across the country, who've been wrongfully convicted, but who haven't the resources or the attention they needed to get out of there. And so I always need to say that because sometimes people, Kanika will say, oh, everybody says they're innocent. No, they don't. If you do this work, you know that people don't normally say that unless it's true, because they already know that people know. In the streets,
Right.
people know. And so there's no sense of you telling that lie and trying to get some attention. So my experience has been that people who do the wrong will admit it. Now, sometimes they will admit that the sentence was harsher than it needed to have been, and we know that just from the racism in the system that that's probably true. But they don't not say they did it. They say I did it, and I'm responsible. I'm remorseful. But sometimes that doesn't make a difference in the scheme of things. Uh,
Absolutely. So primarily, we work with people who are wrongfully convicted over sentence. Also, we do a lot with the juvenile justice system and reform, things of that nature. And it is, I can tell you, harder to get someone out of prison who is wrongfully convicted and didn't commit the crime than it is to get someone out who did.
isn't that
So,
something? What's
yeah,
wrong with
it
that
is.
picture? What is wrong with that picture?
Um, I don't know if it's Missouri not wanting to right wrongs. 1 second, let me try to get. I think this is James.
Okay. Yeah, we had already anticipated we might have some problems because
Oh, and it just hung up. Mhm.
when you inside the
Yeah,
system trying to get access to a phone and get a clear line and all of that,
absolutely.
yeah, but we thought all the lucky stars came together just a minute ago before we went on air, and then all of a sudden, boom, we lost two people at the same time.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. But it is very trying when it comes to even with the checkpoints of say probation and parole. I think the number 7 thing on their checklist is admitting guilt, showing remorse, things like that. But if you have someone that is wrongfully convicted, admitting guilt will be a hurdle.
Right,
If they
exactly.
didn't
Yeah.
commit the crime. So that hinders a lot, and there's all these barricades to further oppress people who didn't commit the crimes that they are convicted of.
Well, one of the things that the Organization for Black Struggle, having worked with wrongful convictions and worked with particular prosecutors, one of the things I've told them both publicly and said privately is that you all are coming to an office that, yes, we want you to be reformers going forward, but y'all got some ugly history that has to be taken care of. So you can't go forward without first acknowledging there's been harm done by your office, and sometimes they don't want to go backwards because they say that was under somebody else's watch. I can only do no, 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 that's not the way it works. And so we are still working on cases under the fairly new uh prosecutor. And as you said, it's really hard because unless you have a really cut and dry case, they don't want to touch it because they are fearful that if they, I guess, exonerate somebody and they turn out to be, not innocent, then that's a problem for them. But uh, everything is not always that cut and dry. I mean, sometimes you have emerging DNA that exonerates somebody. That's all good. Sometimes you have a witness that recants, or sometimes you have the perpetrator themselves said, "I did it." That is not always how these cases flow. And so sometimes when you have a case like we're working on one for Federico Lobe,
Mhm.
and yeah, he doesn't have like, somebody recanting. In fact, the victim has now died. I mean, the case is so old. It's been in there close to 37 years. It's a rape case. It's not even a murder case, Kanika. And so, my thing is always like he's been in prison longer than some murderers have been in
Mhm.
prison. So what do you think about that, Mr. Prosecutor or Miss Prosecutor? So yeah, so that's the nature of our current system, which sometimes people think it may be beyond reform, but in the meantime, in between time, you have to make those reforms where you can. And so looking at the cases that you've been involved with, what do you think are the real hurdles in the prosecution's office that keeps people from not getting their case heard in court?
The second time or the first time around
the
when
the
they
the well, both.
so we actually did an initiative, St. Louis Citizens Voices Unheard, where we took a 10-year span and heard cases of individuals who are incarcerated currently that have actual claims of innocence. Some of them have irrefutable evidence of their innocence, yet they still sit behind these bars 20, 30, 40, 50 years without having their stories or their cases being reheard. Prosecutorial misconduct is a huge thing. There's a lot of the same prosecutors on a lot of these cases, same judges, things like that. And honestly, early 90s, things like that, the public defenders tanked a lot of these cases. They did not have adequate representation. That has been a huge thing, more so sometimes than prosecutorial misconduct, where they didn't have a defense.
Yeah.
Cases where public defenders didn't file notice of alibi defense, so their defense wasn't heard at all. Cases where they didn't look at evidence that was not heard, but it was there that could have gotten them off, and showing their innocence. It's just across the board, things from police misconduct and abuse and witness intimidation and threats of harm or violence. Let me try this again. This is James coming through. I'm going to actually try it on the computer. See what we can do. No, I'll just do this.
An offender at the Jefferson City Correctional Center is called from a correctional facility and may be monitored and recorded. To accept, thank you for using Securus. You may start.
I'm going to hold the phone. Hello,
Okay,
James.
that
James. Hey, James, hold on one second. Let me try to get you close to the microphone here. Okay. James, I'm on with Jamala right now.
and we are live.
And we are live. Can you say a few words to see if she can hear you at all? It's really low.
Now that's interesting because it was louder than that when he called the first time. Yeah.
Yeah. I can hear him wrestling with a cord.
Okay. Voices fam, stay patient here. Let's see if we can get James on the phone where you could actually hear his story. So
Okay, James.
that's a little better.
Okay, let's just try to. I'm gonna lean it up on the board. Okay. So James, we're on with Jamala, as I previously stated. Can you give her a quick introduction?
My name is James. I am um, presently incorporated as the Jefferson City Correctional Center in Jefferson City, Missouri.
Okay.
So, James, I'm going to ask you to talk about your case. And know it goes back, but when I first heard about it, the first case I thought about was Dale Hamlick, and I don't know if you're familiar with that case, Kanika, but it's so similar. Dale was convicted of murdering his mother during the flood. Apparently, he tied a concrete block to his mother and threw her in the raging floodwaters of the Osage River. Now, he admits he was no saint at the time. He was a bad boy. He was behind in his child support payments. And we had an aggressive prosecutor who thought he would be the prime example to make as he pursued his career, his upward career. And so that was none other than Kenny Hushoff, who was the lead prosecutor at the time. This man, Dale, can you imagine, first of all, knowing that your mother has been murdered, where you don't even have the chance to grieve? You are now the prime suspect and have to then deal with your own defense. To me, that's just double cruelty. So, in the long story short, he was convicted. Luckily, he did not get the death penalty, which is, Kennedy was calling for that because that's how he made his mark on sort of, crime, tough on crime. But he got 50 years without parole. For him, the luck is that he got enough support for his case, enough spotlight on there, enough resources that he was able to get that exonerated. But he served 15 years for a crime he didn't commit. So when I heard about the flood of 1993 with James, I couldn't help but think about Dale's case, his mother being murdered during that time. And of course, once the powers to be go for the wrong person, then the right person has escaped. And all the evidence is probably literally, in this case, been washed away. So, James, tell us about your case because it also happened during the big flood of 1993. And we might need Kanika to help be a translator for you. We can't hear you too well.
Okay. Um, I've been incarcerated for almost 33 years for a crime that had died. I mean, I the flood of 1993 affected millions of people, in the Midwest. Uh, for about 4 or 5 days leading up to the levee failure, I was a volunteer at the Weather Levee. A friend of mine, his mom, Richard suggested it. Instead of us boys, just hanging out, doing whatever, he recommended it or suggested that he go volunteer to them. Well, I took her funny. I did that, and I went to West Punch Levee. I volunteered there 4 or 5 days, maybe 6 days, throughout the course of the 12. I didn't work, a lot of days, but I worked there, 4 or 5 days. And I remember one time, one night, my ex-wife and I, we went to try to go stand bags. The two places were shut down for the night. But as I said, I volunteered on the West Levee, volunteering, doing certain things, walking, patrolling, doing what I could. On July 16th, probably the time, mid-morning, me and the guy that I was walking with, he's the problem, north of the Bayview Bridge. And we went to try to find somebody, and we found a guy that we thought was a person of authority. we went and talked to him, and we got the problem. We need to come look at it. We walked up there, and about halfway, 3/4 of the way up there, he stopped and said, "My main concern is that my guy stopped the Daisy Bridge. But what I would do, uh, I will let somebody know and have him come check it out." We don't know if he ever did, uh, but about the levee failed on uh, around 8:22 p.m. The West Clinton levee failed. We don't know. I didn't know at the time if it failed at the exact spot that I know it's the problem or not. But after the levee failed, I helped the Coast Guard put boats in the water to go search. After that, I lost my keys, in the process of helping the Coast Guard. So I had to have my car was towed to my parents' house. When I arrived at my parents' house, before that, I was pulled aside by a woman called, her name is Michelle McCormack. She was with WCEM there in Springfield, Illinois. They asked me for an interview. I gave her an interview, and basically described, what I seen, what I experienced, and not knowing at the time that there were police officers who watched that interview, and they're like, "There's no way that Jimmy Scott was over there doing any kind of good, any kind of anything, being any kind of helpful." And the hunt for me began. They believe that because of my past, which is something I'm. And if I didn't have the problems I did as a kid growing up, I don't believe I would be in prison today. But the cops felt that I had no business being over there. And again, the hunt for me began. Next, my car was towed to my parents' house, and I was taking
But yeah, and it's raining cats and dogs here. But I'm thinking though, at the point that they saw you and they had some history with you, they took it to the next level, obviously. But how could they have convinced a prosecutor to take a case where there was no there? Can you talk about a bit about that? I mean, it's one thing to say, "Oh, I know that dude's up to no good. What is he doing there helping with sandbags?" Okay, yeah, that might be a observation that they had, but how could they convince a court to say this man is a murderer?
No one died during there's no fatalities or anything like that during the flood.
Eh,
So, in James's case, I tell him all the time, even in media, because I remember and was affected by the flood of 93 myself. Um, it was a natural disaster. Yet James is in prison for over 30 years. How does a human being cause a natural disaster? I tell him
I,
all the time, I say, "James, you are Missouri's best kept secret because no one knows you're in prison for causing the flood of 93.
I mean, I can't even think about anybody during Katrina, that, except for the folks who needed to be called out, and that was the fact that the levees were old and were had already been predicted at some point to break. But an individual that that's unheard of. So again, what evidence did they produce to
I
say
believe it's
yes?
more political than it is anything because a lot of people um, recuperated off of it being from a person rather than a natural disaster.
And talk about that. Well, first of all, let's answer the question in terms of the evidence, because you got to go into the courtroom with something to get the jury to buy this story.
Mhm.
You got to get 12 people convinced, and I don't. Maybe they weren't convinced totally, which is why I don't know. It's just such a confounding kind of situation where you have an individual that's being accused of setting a levee off that causes a flood first of all, that's pretty, pretty an amazing story. But how did you convince 12 people that that happened? James, you were there. What happened?
Yeah, they took a that I made the police, that I moved sandbags, which I actually did. I moved sandbags every when they think of the levee, they think, it was sandbags. Everyone thinks of a levee, being, a sandbag levee or whatever. Every so often they had piles of sandbags which were there to be used to shore up depressed areas or trouble spots. And I moved 4 or 5 sandbags from an area that was strategically placed there for that purpose. I moved sandbags from one area to a depressed area. And the sandbags that I moved were probably 40, 50 pounds apiece. So they wasn't light. And I moved those sandbags to a depressed area, which I thought was a trouble spot. And there were experts that testified, and there are experts across the country who don't believe that moving 4 or 5 sandbags caused the levee to fail. And I told him, I said, if my actions caused the levee to fail, that was not my intention. But again, I don't believe my actions caused it to fail. They took the statements from some neighborhood kids, saying that Jimmy Scott said he wanted to break the levee, and they went as far as saying they talked to one guy, Joe Flax. When they spoke with Joe Flax in July of 1993, Joe Flax, with his mother present, said Jimmy Scott never broke the levee. He never told me he broke the levee. When I was granted a retrial due to prosecutorial misconduct, and in 1998 I went back for retrial. Well, preparing for my trial, they took a videotape deposition from this Joe Flax. And Joe Flax made the statement that Jimmy Scott broke the levee, told me he broke the levee. He took a shovel, dug in the side of the levee, got on his hands and knees, and bored the hole out, and the levee broke. Well, who did you tell? I told these cops. Well, what cops did you tell? And he mentioned Neil Baker, Dennis Bowden, and Mel Gibson. Well, there's no Mel Gibson at the Quincy Police Department. It's Detective Robert Bell. Well, during my appeal process, my attorneys took depositions of all 3 of these police officers, and all 3 of them said, Joe Flax never told us anything about Jimmy Scott breaking the levee. One cop went as far as calling Joe Flax the biggest campfire that I've ever met. But they used basically, they looked at my statement that I gave to the police and used that statement, which was a lie, and other statements from other people to convict me. We had an expert witness, David Hammer. He testified for me at my trial, actually both trials, and he basically staked his career on my innocence. He said that there's no way that Jimmy Scott broke the levee, that it was natural causes, and not an act of sabotage. This case is really left a sour taste in his mouth because he believed that the jury basically disregarded what he said, and what David Hammer does. He's been in the business that he does right now. He's been doing this since the 60s. He was making topographical maps for the government. When he was in the military, so he knows his stuff. And for him to step out on them and say, stake his career on my innocence, that says a lot. But that's basically what they used to convict me. We don't believe that there was evidence there, and there shouldn't have been nothing because I shouldn't be here today. I should be home.
So, Jim, what I hear you saying is the so-called person who had the testimony that nailed you initially said you didn't do it, and then he came back some years later to say you did do it, which makes people like me and Kanika who know this system and working with these cases know that somewhere somehow the prosecutors got to this guy and say we need you to do this, and if you don't, this could happen to you. So it seems like there was some intimidation that happened during that time for somebody to be very clear on what happened 1 year, and then several years later, all of a sudden, they're very clear on a completely different story. So obviously, you lost the retrial, right?
Yeah, when after my trial, Adam Piszek, he was prepared to do a story on my case. I remember walking up the stairs, going in the two house back at the wall, the old prison, head back at the wall. I turned to Adam and said, "Find Joe Black. He knows the truth." And he found him, and Joe Black made a statement to the police. I mean, to Joe, to Adam Piszek, and if you pay me, I'll talk. Well, for one, that's not going to happen. That's unethical. And two, I just want you to tell the truth. I want you to say, I can't prove that he was given something, promised something to say what he said. But, if something smells bad, you better look to make sure, see what it is, because, we know he lied, and I believe they denied me my right to confront him face to face, because under the confrontation clause, you either have to be dead, they can't find you, or you're incapacitated. And they knew where he was, because he was in work with each other in Illinois, and they could have brought him to my trial. But they didn't do it because I believe they knew that he would have been found out. But I don't know. My attorney was working in collusion with prosecutors because, I don't know.
Wow. So, if you're just joining us, this is Jamala Rogers, your host of Voices from the Battlefield, and we are here talking to James, aka Jimmy Scott, who's calling from Jefferson. I don't even call it correctional, Jefferson Prison, um, about his case, which is really a pretty phenomenal case where he was accused of unleashing the levees and starting the flooding of 1993. Also joining us is Khanika Harper, who's been working with this case as well as other wrongful conviction cases. And, Jimmy's case has been highlighted some, and he's also been the subject of a documentary, and as Kanika talked earlier, a second documentary. So I'm wondering, with the increased publicity about the case, what is the prognosis for exoneration or freedom or overturning of the case? What do we know about that right now?
Well, after 30 plus years, James will be going up for his first parole hearing this month. In 30 plus years. Jimmy, if you want to speak a little bit about what's to come, you have the floor.
Nikki just said, I go up from the parole board for the first time since my incarceration. My parole hearing was moved as been moved numerous times for whatever reason, but I'm finally getting the opportunity to go on the board. I have proclaimed my innocence since day one, and I know the board of probation and parole, they want to show remorse. They want somebody to say I'm sorry, but I believe because of my stance, I can't go up there and admit something I haven't done, or show any kind of remorse. I do feel sorry for what people went through, what people lost during the 1993 flood. But as for me taking responsibility for something I haven't done, I can't do that. And I'm fully aware because of my stance that they may never let me out because of that. I've had guys here say, you need to go over and tell them you're sorry and show remorse, they'll let you go. And other guys here have told me, you can't do that. He said, regardless of what these other people say, you proclaim your innocence, since the beginning, And if you go in front of the parole board and you say, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, they're going to say, one of them may ask me, well, you lying in or you lying now? Are you
Right.
and saying, well, I can't do that, and I won't do that.
So
You know,
based on staying true to your principles, Jim, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, it seems like to me that the criteria for getting parole needs to be changed, because what we found over the years, and Kanika can verify this, is that people who come are not all guilty. And so it seems to be no leverage, no, for people who come with claims of innocence. Because I'd be like you. I'm like, I'm not agreeing to nothing. I didn't do it. I didn't do it then. I didn't do it now. And I know y'all are dangling this freedom in front of me, but I'm gonna have to suck it up and continue my path of righteousness. So what can we expect? And is there anything the general public can do in terms of letters to the parole board or anything else to support you?
I know there is a Missouri statute that basically says defenders continue claiming.
I think his phone went out. We're gonna see if it comes back on. Oh, hey Jimmy, your phone went out for a second. We didn't hear you. Can you repeat that?
You were talking about the statute.
Situation. All right, the statute, okay. It's, it says there is a Missouri statute specifically parole context that expressly lists defenders considered claim of innocence is something a board may consider, along with prison records, self-rehabilitation, workable parole plan, and community account report. Since my incarceration, I've received full conduct violations. And matter of fact, Ms. Miranda Martin, she's one of the assistant wardens here. She did my first violation back in 2006. And she asked me, she said, how much did you pay? You've been locked up all these years. My response to her was, I didn't break the law to come to prison. I'm not. Like I said, I've had 4 violations. I have a good work record with staff. My job, I've worked in and around the same job since 1998. I have good work records, an institutional record. My support with support and relationships with staff, and inmates. I mean, there's nothing else I could possibly do besides what I've already done, but to continue doing what I'm doing. I can't do more, like I said, than what I've already done. I'm well liked and respected by everybody here. And I know, and a lot of people who know my case is kind of confusing because, they said, you just don't seem like that you're the person should be in prison. Now, that being said, I take responsibility for, the dumb things that as a kid, I'm growing up. But I also take responsibility for the man I am today. I have self-rehabilitated myself. I've taken every class possible. I went through the year-long ICC program. Everything I could possibly do to better my situation, give me the tools, my toolbox to go home. If a situation happens to, or when I finally release home, I have those tools. I have a good relationship with and with the support group, for when that day comes for me to be released. And I also have plans to work with Khanika, Dina, Sheena, and others, because the system here in Missouri is broken. It needs fixed. It needs overhauled, and I'm hoping to be a part of that. But first, I have to get out and go home.
So one of the things I know they always consider is, would you be a danger to yourself and others should you be released? And it sounds like, based on the work that you've done, the personal work that you've done, that would not be the case. So what is the exact date of the parole board hearing, and I'm going to ask this to you, Kanika, so we make sure we hear it loud and clear. Is it appropriate for folks to send letters on behalf of Jim regarding this case?
Absolutely. Letters to PNP. James also has an attorney that put together a parole packet as well, and that shows all of his accomplishments that he's acquired while being incarcerated, things of that nature. But letters of support
Should
would
they go directly to the attorney or to the parole board? If people want to write a letter and say this, even if they don't know specifically about the case, and I have to tell people this all the time, no, when people like me and Kanika work on these cases, we can't say unequivocally we know that this person is innocent. But what we are saying is that based on the evidence that we have and that that person was convicted on, we
Mhm.
got some strong suspicions that that was not the case. And we also know that the process by which they got there was unfair. And so even if you just say it seems like it was unfair, process of conviction, you don't have to say, I believe he's innocent if you don't believe that. But you need to talk about like the circumstances of the case. And also you just heard that James has done all he possibly can do to better himself. If you want to see there's many articles about his case, but also there's the documentary about the case where you actually can hear Jim in his own voice talk about what he's done. So if it goes to the board here, you can go online and get the address for that and try to appeal to the better judgment of these people about this case. Because after 30
Absolutely.
years, come on, y'all,
I
please.
mean, at best, it would be a vandalism case. At best, 30 plus years, and this is your first time for a parole hearing. Um, that is that is an injustice in itself. That is an
Yeah,
injustice in itself. On top of, we know I've personally seen the rate of wrongful convictions go up. At one point, it was 2% of people, then it was 9% of people. They're saying now it's upward of 10% of everyone that's incarcerated is in there unjustly, that they didn't commit the crime that they're convicted for. Well, it's 24,000 people in Missouri prisons alone. That is 2,400 people in prison for something that they didn't do.
and I know a large majority have written you for help because they've written the Organization for Black Struggle, and for organizations like us, it's almost impossible other than to lift their voices in best we can. But the cost of retrying that and
Yes.
independent folks like we work very closely with Centura Ministries up from it's a New York based, and our first case with them in 1999 was the Ellen Reasonover case. But those cases cost close to $500,000 to retry. And this is on the part of those nonprofits. This is not the Justice Department. I mean, the justice system going through this. You got to collect all that evidence and bring it to them and say, hey, here's what we found out. So now would you take a look at it and see what you find? Who's got those kind of resources, y'all? So this is why it's important to do all we can as everyday citizens who are paying
Absolutely.
taxes, who these people are being convicted in our name when we know the circumstances were unjust. And so we need you to just do a letter, handwritten if you need to, send it to the board of
Probation
probation
and parole.
and say, please give this man, serious consideration. He's done all he can do for a crime that he didn't commit. And again, the crime, I'm trying to remember, what is the crime? Is it the crime destruction of public property?
Well,
What was he convicted of?
it was hundreds of acres of land, property, homes, farmland, things of that nature, both in the Illinois and Missouri side that was affected by the Great Flood of 93. Um,
So did they put a dollar amount on that to say, what? just it just seems so far fetched. I'm just trying. I know my listeners are saying, what the, but yeah. So one of the things I think this does is Jim was helping as many people did during the flood. I can remember here in even St. Louis, people, gathered where they needed to do the sandbagging to
Oh
help
yeah.
neighbors helping neighbors. And to think that you could be accused of something because a rogue police recognized you in a TV interview, it's the kind of thing that makes people take a second thought of, first of all, helping, because I remember even in the Ellen Reasanover case where she came forward to say she saw some suspicious activity at the service station where she
Mm-hmm.
went to get change, and next thing you know, she's a suspect, and not only a suspect, but eventually gets arrested, convicted of a crime. So people are like, that's why I ain't gonna get involved. No, 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 no. You fight to make a system just so that you will never get convicted of a crime like that. That's what you do. You don't say, I'm not gonna help. I'm not going to help, do sandbagging. I'm not going to help like report suspicious activity when somebody's been murdered at a service station. That shouldn't be the reaction. The reaction should be, if that happened to me, what kind of system do I want to have to go through that's going to find me innocent? So I just think that we all have an obligation to make these systems who are operate. All these people are being paid by us, y'all. These are public servants. A prosecutor gets paid by us to make sure that there's a fair process and that the people who are guilty are really guilty. And if you make a mistake, which is there's human error, that you're going to work twice as hard to make sure that that person gets exonerated. And instead, and Kanika, you can speak to this, they work twice as hard to keep the truth from coming out, because should you find out that the system was wrong, and not just wrong, but intentionally wrong, where you manipulated evidence, hid evidence, destroyed evidence, the police, intimidated witnesses, and then in some cases lied about what happened, then you actually have more of an obligation to make sure that those people get justice. And that's the part that we don't see as readily, I'm sad to say. James, do you want to say anything else about your case that people should know about that they may not know?
Well, since my documentary came out in 2022, there's been a lot of information that has, been uncovered pertaining to the West Quincy levy, people associated with the West Quincy levy. Up until about 4 or 5 years ago, the Corps of Engineers had no idea that I even existed in the Missouri Department of Corrections, for the cause of levy failure. They made a report, I think in August of 1993, and it reported that at the West Quincy levy, the proper term for that is the Palace Levy District in West Quincy, Missouri, that levy failed due to overtopping.
Mm-hmm.
There was a 1,081 levy broke due to it, during the 93 flood, and they convicted me of one of them. Again, the Corps of Engineers had no idea that there was a kind of locked up in the state of Missouri for that levy failure. The motive that prosecutor put was I wanted the levy to break so I could party, mess around on my then wife, and do some good fishing. Well, the levy broke July 6th. Well, July 17th, her mom and I, my ex-wife Susie, her mom and I talked on the phone numerous times, trying to find arrangements to try to get her home with me in Illinois. And we finally made arrangements where I was going to pick her up. I was going to drive to Hamilton, Illinois, and her mom and dad was going to drive her to Kiev, Iowa. And she was driving probably across Business City to Hamilton, Illinois, where I picked her up. So the motive was for me to strand her over there so I could party, mess around, do all kinds of stuff. Well, she was home with me. That's 24 hours after the next sale. So that was completely burnt out of water. That motive. We didn't know that Norman Hare, he's the commissioner of the West Coast Levy, that we had no idea until an investigative reporter or somebody from somebody found a C-SPAN video from Norman Hare testifying in front of Congress in Washington, D.C. about never knew that existed. We never knew that Norman Harry even went to Washington D.C. to talk to Congress about the '93 flood. But I think he made a comment that because the Corps of Engineers, over decades, you know, the Corps was responsible for that levee failure. When they ran a retrial in '97, I went back to retrial in '98, and we had they started on April 30th. On May 8th, this levee district, the Texas Levee District, joined a class action lawsuit blaming the Corps of Engineers for what they had just found me guilty of. Up until about, we have no idea what happened to the lawsuit, how they ruled or how they decided. But about 5 years ago, or right before the documentary came out, Norman Harris said he was making comment. I never serviced, like that. Now Norman Harris believes I served some time, but I want to say this is funny, but this is just something you can't make up. July 16th is Norman Harris' birthday. His daughter made him a cake, or had a cake made for him, and he depicted a levee. In the levee, they showed the levee on the cake. They showed the levee breaking. So the cake actually, it looked like it was breaking, and there was a barge coming through the break. The levee. He gave him this cake on July 16th, sometime in the morning time, between 8 and 12 or somewhere around there. And the West Quincy levee broke at about, you call it around 8:22 p.m. And not one, two, but three barges come through the break. And who was the largest landowner in West Quincy? Where did the levee break at on his property? That's public knowledge. And it's been Quincy Herald Wake on July 18th, the Sunday paper, July 18th. So, that's something that's kind of weird. If you're going to give your dad a cake and the levee breaks, there's a barge coming through, the levee breaks that night and barges come through the break. You can't make that up.
And so,
witness.
yeah. So you can't make it up, but also for our listeners, in terms of just being more analytical, is there's always a story behind the story. Who's going to benefit from James Scott being convicted of this so-called crime? And then when you start to follow the money, you come to the real culprit. And
Follow
so
the money.
somebody's got to be made the scapegoat. And if it's a poor working class black person, a poor working class white person, Latina, it doesn't make any difference. This is a sacrifice that's going to be made, so I can either advance my career, get some money. Somewhere in there is benefiting somebody who is victim, who's going to use the system to victimize a person who is the most vulnerable to the system. And so, I think that. And this is the thing that people have a hard time with reconciling. How could somebody do that and know that they have somebody in prison for something that they helped to create the whole scenario around? And that goes even for somebody who willingly or who knowingly knows that there's somebody in prison serving time for what they did. Those
We
those are
gotta
real
look.
those are real sociopaths, the way that I look at it. I did the crime and I'm watching on the news. Some poor soul is getting ready to take the hit for what I did, and I don't see nothing wrong with that. It is what it is, kind of thing. Now, sometimes the people over time, the guilt gets to them and they confess.
Mm.
But we got folks who we raised as sociopaths, and so the empathy is not there. And so their thing is somebody would have done it to me, so I'm gonna do it to somebody else. And yeah, that's the sad state of affairs. But we, the people, have the obligation and the responsibility of making this system just for anybody who has to go through it, whether they are guilty or not. And some people say, I'm guilty, I'll take the lesser sentence, whatever. But there's people who are not. And Kanika, I think it's more than the 10%. You know, I
Well, that's
because
just the ones that we know about.
that we
Because
know
again,
about.
they don't count those heads that are still in prison screaming, "Hey, I have this evidence." They're counting the ones that they actually bring home nationally,
Right.
and
And
that's
I would
still.
say, Kanika, there's also many who have just given up to say
Oh,
nobody's
absolutely.
listening, nobody's going to do anything, so I'm just stuck. I'm going to do the time. Those people have just been beat down and they're not going to make a lot of noise. They've accepted their fate, which is an unjust fate.
It
But
is.
nevertheless, they figure the hurdles are too high to climb for me to get the attention I need. I don't have resources for an attorney. My family, can't help me. They're struggling out there on their own. So I'm just going to accept my fate, which is really sad. I think it's the saddest part of the story about the unjust criminal justice system.
Which will
Ja-
increase the. I mean, you got to look at it. If 10% of planes fell out of the sky, would you go to the airport to take a flight? If 1 out of 10 planes was going to hit the ground,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
that's an
yeah.
enormous number.
Right, right. Yeah. It's a lot. I want you to go over again. This is the last thing because I always try to give people an assignment. Your assignment is, Kanika, tell them their assignment with the parole board.
If you could write to the parole board, we have 7 people on Missouri's parole board. Write to the parole board. The address is online, is Missouri's PNP. Um, and advocate for support for James Scott. He is located at the Jefferson City Correctional Center. Jimmy, can you give them your inmate ID number? 1 more time. That was a little muffled.
1001364.
Okay, his inmate ID number is 1001364. He's located at the Jefferson City Correctional Center, also known as JCCC. Just in a letter of support for his release. His parole hearing is going to be this month, July 22nd. I don't believe we have a time yet, do we, Jimmy? No.
No, and you first or last or
Yeah.
they say it's gonna happen.
It'll be throughout the day, sometime on the 22nd of this month. So there's still time to email, write a letter, or even just simply give him a call.
And we hope that you will because that's very little effort considering this man has been incarcerated for 30 years. That's the least we could do is to pick up a pen or a typewriter and type out something, slap a stamp on there and get it to the parole board on its behalf. Because wouldn't it feel really good for you to be a part of this man being released after July 22nd? And
We're
so
just
that's a,
ecstatic that he's actually getting a date because his parole hearing over the 30 plus years has been pushed off. He hasn't
right.
had one. So
Yeah. And somebody's helping to push it off. And so we got to push back, y'all. Somebody's
very
making sure
super.
he doesn't get that parole hearing. We need to say he deserves that hearing, and here's why. And this man needs to be freed immediately. Immediately. Thank you, Jimmy, for taking time out. Khanika Harper with Missouri for All. Thank you for joining us. We got a lot to do, y'all. As you can see, we got battles on all kind of fronts. Next week, we are going to have my friend Kika Matos, who is now the head of the National Immigration Law Center, who's going to talk about what's happening with, immigration and citizenship, particularly with Haitians. This is another battlefront, y'all, that we need to be mindful of. And we also coming up on Sunday, I believe, is the Mill Creek play is going to happen. This is the culmination of the Mill Creek exhibit at the History Museum. So if you haven't seen that, you need to get there. Go there at the same time that the play is, and that's going to be up on my website. So that's what's coming up. All of this you can see on my website, JamalaRogers.com. If you forget anything, if you want to hear another program that you missed, that's the place to go. So Again, thank you to my guest today.
Africans at home.
That's the wrong thing. My music is squared up again, but thank you for joining us. This is Jamala Rogers, and I will see you on the battlefield. Thank you for listening.
We don't